The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we turn our hearts to you, thankful that you promise to hear us when we pray. We thank you for the role you have given each to serve our community. I ask your blessing upon these who labor for our sake. There are times when, even though we may be surrounded by so many people, we feel very alone. We lift up all who feel this way today. Loving God, you care for us day by day. And with you as our companion, we are never alone. Give us a renewed sense of your presence and care this day. We thank you for the role you have given each to serve. We pray that you would give us grace to set a good example to all whom we serve, to be just and true in all our dealings, conscientious in the charge of every duty, generous and courteous to all. Fill us anew with passion as we attend to our work this day, standing strong not from our own strength, but from being reminded again of your love and abiding presence with us. As we conclude our prayers this day, we pause to remember and give thanks for the life of our colleague, Larry Haws. And as we do, we ask your blessing upon his wife, Faye, and their 4 children during this time of mourning. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Reverend Grady St. Dennis, our own house chaplain. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 87th session, 2012, 94th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Tuesday, March 27th, 2012.
If there are no objections, further reading of the journal will be dispensed, and the journal will be approved and corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objections, the journal will be approved and corrected by the chief clerk. Representative Haws.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Madam Speaker, members, yesterday this body lost a statesman, a former member who many of us have served with. The state lost a statesman. Our community in central Minnesota lost a statesman. Representative Larry Haws was one that probably brings a lot of smiles to our faces. One thing that we may remember him by is his fedora. I won't put it on today because I can't fit in his shoes nor his hat. But Representative Haws was an amazing individual. We all would wish that we leave a legacy behind. I think that's something that comes with public service. But Representative Haws, of all the people I've served with, has left a legacy behind like no other. He has been a public servant for 6 decades. He's been a coach, a teacher, a community member with the Parks and Rec Department in St. Cloud, a county commissioner, and a state legislator. He has touched countless lives, lives that he saw grow up and have children of their own, and lives that he touched that he probably hadn't even met. That is the true mark of a statesman. When Representative Haws retired in 2010, he addressed this body and he talked about the work above the Speaker's desk. And the work above that he referenced as the spirit of government. Representative Haws embodied that spirit of government. He believed in the work that he did and that we all did. He believed in the unbounding possibilities that young kids and children can have. And he contributed, and he cherished, and he cultivated that spirit, not only in the work that he did, but the lives that he touched. I'm going to miss him. I sat next to him for his service here in the House, and sometimes I'd have to back up a little bit because he'd get so animated, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't an unintended target, but he was a special person. And I will miss him as a friend, and the state will miss him as an advocate, as a statesman, as a true embodiment of the spirit of government. With that, Madam Speaker, I would like to yield to Representative Banyan.
Member from Stearns, Representative Banyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Haws. This is a difficult speech to give, but it's one that's necessary, I think. I knew him in the community a lot, but mostly by the headlines that you see. He made such an impact, as Representative Haws said, for six decades in our community. And when I campaigned to try to win the opportunity to represent the district that he served, I won't say his seat. It's not his seat. It's not my seat. I found a lot of people who had been touched by him. One of them I remember particularly knocking on his door, and he says, "Well, who are you running against?" I named my opponent. He says, "Well, I don't remember that person. Whose seat is this?" And I said, "Currently held by Representative Haws." "Coach Haws." "Yeah, I remember him." You know what Coach Haws did for me? When I was a kid, I wanted to wrestle, but you needed shoes to wrestle with, and I didn't have the shoes. Coach Haws got me the shoes. It's hard to beat it would be hard to, it's easy to understand. It'd be hard to beat a guy that has actually given shoes to folks. And as I went on, I got to experience it personally. I want to tell you one story and tell you the story of the last time I saw Representative Haws. Representative Haws was a coach, and we mentioned wrestling, but his heart was really with the Cathedral High School cross-country team. That was really something he felt very strongly about. In our team, my daughter runs cross-country with a different school, and we would see Representative Haws at all of these different events, all these cross-country meets. And he would greet me with, "How's your daughter? How's my favorite Republican? How's my..." And just this wonderful voice, and a guy that clearly was still bound by the wheelchair, but, in body, but certainly not in spirit. And I remember it was in Sartell where I saw him last at a meet there. And at the finish line, he cheered for his Cathedral runners who won the meet, and cheered for all the other kids too, including my daughter. And that meant a lot to me. So I'll miss him too. And with that, Madam Speaker, I would hope I could yield to Representative Gottwald.
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker and members, I don't know what I can add to what Representative Haws so eloquently said. He and Larry were such great colleagues here on the floor. And Larry, I'm going to miss you too. Our two Larrys in the back, we often confuse their names. But I know Larry was a great mentor to you and a great friend. And it's so hard to describe. St. Cloud has lost a great man. And I talked with some of my friends back in the community last night, and none of us can imagine what St. Cloud is going to be like without Larry Haws. I mean, it has not dawned on us yet that this great man has passed from our midst. Larry was a man of passion, of good humor, of generosity, and one of the most genuine individuals I have ever met. You always knew when Larry talked to you or advocated on an issue or did anything that it was coming right from here, that it was coming right from the heart. Whether it was with his own kids or with the so many kids that he coached and taught. I had the chance to serve for 9 years on the St. Cloud City Council when Larry was our Parks and Rec director. I served as the City Council rep on the Parks and Rec board and watched the passion with which he approached that too. He loved making our community better. He loved trying to make it a better place to live, our parks, our recreation, giving kids meaningful activities. And that came from his own experience as a young person. I had not heard it before, but he once gave a speech. I forget what the event was. But Larry got up and he talked about his own youth. And he identified that as the font for his commitment to young people. And he really had that just in spades. An incredible, incredible man. Cared about veterans. You know that he led the way on veterans issues here at the legislature a lot. Cared about vulnerable people, poor people, people who needed help. But Larry, we are going to miss you so much, and our hearts go out to Faye and to your 4 kids and to all the people that you touched so eloquently with your life. Madam Speaker, at this time, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence.
Members, please stand for a moment of silence for former Representative Larry Haws. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Comparison reports. Copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there are no objections, the motions will prevail. Hearing no objections, the motions prevail. The substitutions will be made. Reports of standing committees and divisions. Copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there are no objections, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objections, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading, House File 2294.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2754.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2939.
Second reading. Second reading of Senate files.
Second reading, Senate File 1993.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 2183.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 2184.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 2342.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 1420.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 2493.
Second reading. Introduction and first reading of House files. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The Chief Clerk will report these House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House File 2973 through 2979.
First reading, House File 2973 through 2979. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Dittrich motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment to concurrence to the House is respectfully requested. House File 2078, an act relating to education finance. Dittrich moves that the House concur in the Senate amendment to House File 2078 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
I call the member from Hennepin, Representative Dittrich, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, that is my bill and that is my motion. Members, what this, I would like to accept the Senate language. All it does is take a couple of grammatical corrections that the Senate made. The original substance of the bill is still intact. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion to the motion. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the Dittrich motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2078 as amended by the Senate.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended by the Senate. Its title is agreed to.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate files herewith transmitted. Senate File 1140, 2173, 1815, 1835, 1860, 1911, 1948, 2014, and 2334. Signed, Kel R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate files.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1140, an act relating to public safety. The bill is referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2173, an act relating to health. Lomer moves that House File 2173 and House File 2626 now on the calendar for today be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1815, an act relating to energy. Hackbart moved that Senate File 1815, House File 1989, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1835, an act relating to human services. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Reform. Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1860, an act relating to the environment. Sanders moves that Senate File 1860, House File 2316, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1911, an act relating to natural resources. House moves that Senate File 1911, House File 2343, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1948, an act relating to human services. Kiffmeyer moves that Senate File 1948, House File 2374, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2114, an act relating to metropolitan government. Scott moves that Senate File 2014 and House File 2404, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2334, an act relating to lobbying. Pepin moves that Senate File 2334 and House File 2684, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered. Calendar for the day. The first bill in the calendar for the day is House File 1816. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 1816, first engrossment, an act relating to public safety.
Call the member from Olmsted, Representative Benson M., to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 1816 would authorize federally licensed firearm dealers the ability to sell firearms, silencers, or noise suppressors to local law enforcement, the Department of Natural Resources. Currently, it's not legal for dealers, importers, and manufacturers to either possess or manufacture these devices, even for the purpose of demonstrating or selling to both of these agencies that are authorized by law to possess them. This would give the ability of our own dealers in the state of Minnesota to be able to sell these devices, possess them so that they could. Currently, our 1,600 dealers and 137 manufacturers are not even authorized by law to possess for the purpose of even demonstrating these so that they can sell them to law enforcement and the DNR. So that's what this bill will do, members, and I would ask for your support.
Discussion to the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I first want to make it clear to everyone that law enforcement does not support this bill. They have not in any way indicated support for this, despite trying to get them to support it. There's no need for this bill. There absolutely is no need. They claim that they need it for demonstrating their product. Those of us in the Democratic side of the committee offered to make a compromise and have demonstration models available that they could use for law enforcement. The fact is, members, we have huge amounts of guns stolen in this state and then used illegally, constantly. And where are these often used? Often in my district and other parts of the inner city, often by gangs. These are going to be stolen also. So think about it. You're talking about areas of the cities that are already plagued by crime, a lot of gang wars. So what did we do? We got shot spotters so that law enforcement could get to those locations quickly and stop the slaughter in our neighborhoods. Now you're introducing silencers which cripple the shot spotters so that the police can no longer get to those shootouts and stop it. And I just can't believe that you're calling this a jobs bill, because there may be a handful of jobs for manufacturing and probably a lot more jobs for emergency rooms and ambulance drivers. Members, vote no on this.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1816.
Third reading. The member from Ramsey, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Benson yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Johnson.
Representative Benson, who's going to be responsible for monitoring and enforcing the sale and transfer of these silencers?
Member from Olmsted, Representative Benson M.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative. Thank you for the question. There's a couple of remarks that were made in the previous speaker, and I will address your question. First of all, we already have it in statute, the precautions that have to be made by any dealer, those 50 and below and those above 50, to make sure that they are secure. The fact that the ATF are the folks that monitor these, the two people that I used in testimony that are manufacturers and dealers from my own district have been inspected personally by the ATF in the last 12 months, and that was included in part of their testimony. So we already have laws, regulations to monitor and make sure that these are kept safe. And to the previous remarks that were made by Representative Mullery, the incidence of crime being committed by someone using a suppressor is so small, is so very rare, that it's not even statistically kept. So the fact that this is going to cause exponentially more crime has not been demonstrated. I would like to add for the members that they would know that we already have 37 states that allow not only for dealers, manufacturers, and importers to possess these, that anyone can possess them. One state, Missouri, allows for collectors, and then 4 more states already allow for dealers, including the state of California, who arguably have the most restrictive gun rights or gun regulations in our nation, allow this to happen. And to the question about whether or not this is a jobs bill, well, I'm going to allow for Representative Scott to speak in a few minutes, but it absolutely is. Members, I've passed out a list of 137 dealers in the state of Minnesota, many of them who've contacted me about the importance of making sure that we're able to do this. Currently, none of our dealers, manufacturers, or importers can even possess to demonstrate. So your remark, Representative Mullery, about having some for the purpose of demonstration, unless we pass a law, they will not be able to do that. Thank you.
The member from Rams, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Representative Benson will continue to yield.
He will yield. Representative Johnson.
Well, Representative Benson, you're correct that the ATF, the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms folks do the checks, but my question is, how often do they actually check these licensed dealers? What is the frequency at which they get this done?
Member from Olmsted, Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative, by law, they have the ability to, at a maximum, to inspect once a year. How often they do that depends upon the workload of the ATF. I also know that there are 1,600 dealers in the state of Minnesota, which is fewer than portion of population in the United States than of our other states. And my experience so far from the dealers that I've talked to is that they are being inspected. They want to be inspected. They want to be regulated. They want this ability, though, in order to make sure that they don't have to have unfair competition with the dealers in other states surrounding the state of Minnesota.
Member from Rams, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the fact of the matter is, members, according to congressional research, these licensed dealers only get inspected less than 10% of the time on a yearly basis, and typically it's greater than 5 years from the time they get inspected from one time to another. So essentially what we're seeing here is 1,600 dealers capable of having silencers, more silencers in the commerce in the state of Minnesota, and almost no inspection of where the records kept of who's getting these silencers, where they're being transferred to, how they're being kept, and so forth. If you like the idea of more silencers floating around with no oversight, this is a bill for you. Otherwise, I would suggest a no vote.
Members, 1 minute as we have a guest, a former member in the alcove, serving from 2005 to 2006 from Woodbury, Professor and Representative Mike Sharon. The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Representative Benson for bringing this bill forward. Folks, you have in front of you a letter from JP Enterprises, Inc., and Representative Mullery, they are one of the ones that have this small handful of employees that you don't seem to care about that would lose their jobs or would move them to Wisconsin if this bill is not passed. They have 17 employees that would have to move across the state line in order for this manufacturer to stay in business. They currently have some contracts with the military and with law enforcement, and unless they can prove to these customers that their firearms have been tested with a silencer, they will lose those contracts. So, for Representative the other representative that brought up the issue of the inspections, show me an article, a news article from another state where this is allowed, that there has been a problem. I think you're crying over spilled milk here. This is an issue that would be very difficult for others to get their hands on these silencers. So thank you, Representative Benson, for bringing this bill forward. And I urge a green vote.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Well, Mr. Speaker and members, Representative Mullery, Representative Johnson, as far as I know, law enforcement hasn't expressed even any concerns. In fact, I heard from one group that said as long as the bill remained in this condition, they had no problem with it. And law enforcement has not been bashful at all about voicing their opinion on some of the bills that they didn't like. They have said nothing about this one. This is a safe vote. You're not going to get on the wrong side of law enforcement. No, they're not supporting it outright. But there absolutely is nothing wrong with this bill, and there will be a lot of record keeping for these. And I don't believe that spot shotter quote is right. As far as I know about shot spotters, from when I read about them, they can tell the difference between a backfire, a firecracker, a gunshot, the different sounds. And we haven't heard any complaints from any police or any cities with spot shotters, so I don't believe that's true. This is a safe vote to vote on. You're not going to get on the wrong side of the gun committee. We really had not any controversy at all. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery. The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, Mr. Speaker, members, I really have no opinion on this bill whatsoever. But Representative Cornish, I'm kind of puzzled, Representative Cornish, as to why the fish police needed silencers in the first place. So maybe when we're voting on a bill here in the not too near future, where we increase the licenses for the all of our fishing and hunting and snowmobiles and ATVs, etc., we keep in mind that we're buying night vision glasses for Cornish's old union members, and now silencers and helicopters and everything else. I mean, at least I've been consistent on this issue. I'll probably vote no on this one too. But I noticed that all of a sudden a bunch of my good liberal friends that support the police state are now concerned about this one. And no, I'm puzzled to why the game wardens need silencers in the first place. But if it's to cull the deer herd or shoot a few cormorants or whatever they're called up on Pelican Lake, you used to do that just for sport, Representative Cornish, when you didn't have a silencer. So I don't know how I'm voting, but I do want to say one last thing to Representative Scott. You know, we had the toughest Made in America, Buy American, Help Minnesota Companies law in the United States of America, and during the special session, when I was absent, it somehow disappeared from law. So, you know, a few jobs here, you eliminated thousands of jobs during the special session by insisting that we remove that Made in America provision in the strongest language in the United States of America.
Discussion. The member from St. Louis, Representative Gauthier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Benson yield?
He will yield. Representative Gauthier.
Representative Benson, if I understand your bill right, we're passing a state law to allow silencers, and then we're depending on a federal agency to monitor and licensing. Is that correct?
The member from Olmsted, Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Gauthier, it is the ATF that does the federal licensing, if that's the part of the process, if that answers your question. In terms of monitoring and their inspection, it is ATF officers that do the inspections.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Gauthier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Benson, I'll remind you, it's Representative Gauthier, not Mr. If you would yield for another question, Representative Benson.
He will yield. Representative Gauthier.
Representative Benson, I'm just wondering why we're depending on a federal agency to monitor when this body just passed a contingency bill of federal insolvency, and what we're going to do then.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Benson M.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my apologies, Representative Gauthier. all of the federal licensing is done by the ATF. All the monitoring is done across the United States. The 37 states that currently have it so that anybody, any citizen can have one of these devices is monitored by the ATF. The crime statistics are so minimal, so very rare, that it's impossible to even find it. I would even inform this body that it was a year ago this month that the very issue was brought to the legislature in the state of Washington. It was a Democrat that brought the very same bill, but not to just limit these to dealers, manufacturers, and importers, but to anyone in the state, and it received overwhelming bipartisan support.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Gauthier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, I'm with Representative Ricavina on this. I don't know why the game wardens need a silencer, and I haven't heard any chiefs come to me and say they need this bill to do their job, so I would urge a red vote.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 91 ayes and 40 nays, the bill is passed as title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar for today is House File 2149. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2149, number 16 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to public safety.
Call the member from Hennepin, Representative Simon, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is a domestic violence-related bill. I really appreciate all the support and during committee. There wasn't a word spoken against it. It's actually on the consent calendar in the Senate where we expect unanimous passage. This bill has to do with kind of a grisly, uncomfortable subject. There's a list of offenses in the domestic violence statutes that qualifies a person for an enhanced offense. Not on the list, but what this bill would put on the list is the offense of female genital mutilation, which fortunately is rare, but it does occur. And when it occurs, I think we could all agree, as every single Republican and Democrat has, that it at least ought to be on the relatively long list of offenses that qualify to enhance a sentence for someone who is later convicted of a domestic offense. So that's the bill. There's been no opposition. I appreciate your support.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2149.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar for today is House File 2508. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2508, number 21 on the calendar for today, and Act relating to public safety.
Call the member from Chisago, Representative Barrett, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2508 is a bill that will help keep synthetic drugs, also called designer drugs, out of Minnesota storefronts and off of Minnesota streets and neighborhoods by making it more difficult to sell them in Minnesota. Drug use is an extremely large problem in our country. There are over 20 million people in the United States who abuse or are dependent on illicit drugs. A growing segment of this population are synthetic drug users. This problem is increasing all over the country, where lawmakers of both the federal level and state level are searching and scrambling to find a solution. Last year, all of us did very good work in passing some major legislation that banned synthetic drugs such as bath salts, K2, spice, 2CE, that caused the death of one person in Blaine and the overdose of several more last spring. This year, some head shop owners haven't gotten the message we tried to send and are still selling these drugs to our young people, flaunting the new law. The goal of this legislation is to help stop this emerging problem before it becomes a larger health crisis like so many other illegal drugs currently are, including methamphetamine. The main goal of this legislation is to get these dangerous drugs off our streets. Some members of law enforcement and prosecutors felt like the analog language in last year's bill was too vague, so the bill adds a number of synthetic drug compounds to Schedule I list of illegal drugs. We left the analog language in the bill as makers of these dangerous drugs are constantly tweaking the chemical compounds in their formulas, making every effort to stay one step ahead of us, and many prosecutors have found the analog language useful. The bill also gives the Board of Pharmacy the ability to use expedited rulemaking authority to add drugs to Schedule I. This begins in Section 1, Subdivision 8A, beginning on lines 25.20. Although most stores that had previously sold these drugs have pulled them off of their shelves when the legislature made them illegal a year ago, there are a few shops that refuse to stop selling the drugs. So we've upped the ante on that. We're making the sale of synthetic cannabinoids a felony from a gross misdemeanor. Maybe the threat of prison time will get the message across the state that we don't want one more death in Minnesota as a result of these dangerous drugs. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2508.
Third reading. Member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a really important bill, and I hope you will support it. It's basically the Corey Weiberg from the Pharmacy Board who wrote it this year said there was only a couple sentences changed from my bill from last year, and then the penalty for sellers was increased to felony, which we couldn't do last year because of costs. But this is really important. This is a really dangerous thing. To call it synthetic marijuana or synthetic something else, these are far more dangerous than the actual products. And I hope everybody will get behind this and that it will not just die under leadership as happened last year. So let's pass this and make sure it goes all the way through to the governor.
Discussion. The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will Representative Barrett yield?
He will yield. Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Barrett, I think the bill is fine. I know Representative Barrett, when I drafted my earlier version of this bill, one of the issues was keeping up with all the compounds, keeping up with the science. I heard you mention it. Could you just say a little bit more on how this bill addresses that problem of every little change in compounds seem to elude us?
Member from Chisago, Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Morrow. It does that in a few ways, because I know you're right. What happens here is these drugs are synthetic, meaning they're man-made, meaning some guy or person in a basement or in a back room would create a drug. And then once we make them illegal, they change one element, and then that new drug becomes legal because we didn't list the drug in the law. So we go around that a couple different ways. We're actually listing the drugs this year. Last year what we did is we created the concept of an analog. An analog is a drug that is similar to a real drug, but it's synthetic. So that analog language is still in the bill. In addition, we've added about 250 different chemicals that are derivatives of currently illegal synthetic drugs. A third way is by adding the expedited rulemaking authority that allows the Board of Pharmacy and Dr. Weiberg to expedite the elimination of these illegal drugs, synthetic Schedule I drugs only. Those three ways, I think, will helpfully solve that problem in the future.
Discussion. The member from St. Louis, Representative Gauthier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Barrett, thank you for bringing this bill forward. I'm very supportive of it. And one of the additional things this bill will do as a result of naming these drugs will give law enforcement the ability to charge people under the influence while they're driving, because currently they don't have that ability because they're not listed on the schedule. So, Representative Barrett, thank you for that.
Discussion. Member from Clay, Representative Lanning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise to thank Representative Barrett for bringing this bill forward. If you would like some evidence of what can happen when you don't have legislation like this, I would encourage you to take a look at what's happened on the North Dakota border. North Dakota has laws like this. We haven't had, and as a result, we've seen a proliferation of activity related to these chemicals that we're now trying to regulate. As a result, we've had a number of businesses that are making huge profits at the expense of the people who are buying and using those drugs. In particular, I want to thank Representative Barrett for trying to head off future problems by setting up a mechanism for being able to keep ahead of this. Every time you turn around, somebody comes up with a new concoction that turns out to be harmful and dangerous to people, and I think this bill helps to head off that kind of problem. Thank you. I urge a yes vote.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And will Representative Barrett yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Barrett, could you explain to me whether or not this changes the sale from a gross misdemeanor to a felony, and if so, why that's necessary? Thanks.
The member from Chisago, Representative Barrett.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Moline. It does so. We're changing the penalty for synthetic cannabinoids. A representative mentioned synthetic marijuana. Synthetic cannabinoids, while they may seem similar to marijuana, they are nothing like marijuana. They are 10 to 100 times more powerful than marijuana. It does use the word cannabinoid, which may make some people think that it's just as benign or as dangerous, I guess, depending on your point of view, as marijuana. But these are harsh drugs. So synthetic cannabinoids were left out of the bill last year as it relates to moving the penalty from a gross misdemeanor to a felony. So we want to change that this year. Specifically, there are a couple people around the state that have skirted the law by still selling synthetic cannabinoids, one of which is in the Duluth area. They feel that paying a fine, a small fine, is a good business decision as it relates to the millions of dollars of money they're making selling these things to our youth in our state. So we want to change this concept from a business decision to a decision of whether they want to spend 5 years in prison or not. That is the reason we want to change it to a felony.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Barrett, for answering that question. I agree with you that what is referred to as synthetic marijuana is not only very misleading to what it is, but it is extremely dangerous, and I've unfortunately seen the effects that it has on people. And I agree that we need to be doing everything in our power to make sure that people don't use synthetic marijuana. However, I do worry that we would be increasing something from a gross misdemeanor to a felony. I'm not someone that generally thinks that just because you increase the penalty, people will stop doing it. So I just want members to be aware that we are changing the category of the crime. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question. I'm wondering if the author would yield, please.
He will yield. Representative Clark.
Thank you. I've been supportive of this particular measure in the past, but I do have a question as I look at the bill on page 8. You do list marijuana, and as one of the people who supported the medicinal use of marijuana for cancer and other sort of things, I'm wondering, are we in any way increasing the medicinal penalties for medicinal use of marijuana with this bill?
The member from Chisago, Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative. This bill in no way changes any laws related to marijuana. And going back to Representative Moline, this is about synthetic cannabinoids. The word cannabinoid is used sometimes synonymously with marijuana, but it's not. It's 10 to 100 times or more powerful than marijuana. While there is language in there, cleanup language relating to current drugs, in no way does it change the penalty at all for marijuana. So this bill in no way at all changes anything related to marijuana as it relates to a felony for use of marijuana.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope that's accurate. I'm just noticing on page 7, marijuana, tetrahydrocannabinoid, and synthetic cannabinoids are all listed on the same line. And then on page 8, marijuana is listed by itself. I just guess I wanted to know that you really are clear with this bill that you're not increasing the penalty for the medicinal use of marijuana. And if you give me your assurance on that, despite the fact that it's listed that way, I'll believe you. I'm wondering if you have really looked at that in detail.
The member from Chisago will yield. Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative. Yes, marijuana and synthetic cannabinoids are related in that they are both Schedule I drugs. And so in the fact that they're both Schedule I drugs, and for those people that don't know, there are 5 schedules related to drugs that both the state and the federal government wants to regulate. Schedule I being the worst. By worst, let me explain what a Schedule I drug is. Schedule I drug is a drug or other substance that has a high potential for abuse. It also is a drug or other substance that has no currently accepted medical use and treatment in the United States. And C, there is a lack of accepted safety for use of the drug or other substance under medical supervision. So synthetic cannabinoids and marijuana are both Schedule I drugs, which is why you see them in that section of the bill.
Discussion.
The answer to your question is yes.
Discussion. The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Would Representative Barrett yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Rukavina.
Representative Barrett, where's the fiscal note on this bill and the cost? Did you discuss that already?
The member from Chisago, Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Rukavina, the fiscal note is 0.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Barrett, would you yield for another question?
He will yield. Representative Rukavina.
Representative Barrett, will these people be in a state-run facility or a county-run facility should they get a felony?
The member from Chisago, Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Rukavina. The fiscal note assumes that they will pull it off the shelf and not sell it to our youth.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
So, Mr. Speaker, Representative Barrett, there's going to be no one, if you yield again, there will be no one going to jail because of your bill. Is that what you're telling the floor here today?
The member from Chisago, Representative Barrett.
Mr. Speaker, Representative, my hope is that the few people that are still selling these synthetic cannabinoids would understand that the penalty should not be a business decision. It should be a life decision. Do they want the risk of spending 5 years in prison for a felony, or should they just take them off the shelf and not go to prison? So I can't predict what people are going to do. In fact, I can't predict people who sell drugs to young people. I don't know what their mind is in that regard. So I couldn't possibly predict what decision they have in this regard.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Mr. Speaker, my hope is that you're not going to be Speaker next year, but that might not happen. Because we can't hope here on this floor. And for anyone to stand here today and say that this isn't going to cost money, it's absurd to say that. Members, it's probably not only going to cost money, but it's going to have the unintended consequence of probably throwing some folks young people in jail who just make mistakes, and when we were young, we made a mistake, we kind of got a second chance, but it doesn't happen anymore in society. This bill, again, may be well-intentioned. There's no doubt about that. But, again, I know the consequences, Representative Barrett, and you may be trying to do good things, but it's going to have real negative impacts. And, members, you know, when we passed the bill to go from .10 to .08 for DWIs and to have felonies, whatever it is, 4 DWIs in 10 years would be a felony, everybody said here on the floor, nobody's going to go to jail. No, the last time I checked, I think there were over 200 people in prison for just that 4 DWI in 10 years. But going from .10 to .08, they said there would be no financial consequences on the House floor, and that's totally not true. It's cost us tens of millions of dollars. So this bill does have a financial impact. Nobody on this floor can deny it. And whatever your wishful thinking, Representative Barrett, that this will have some type of make somebody think about it, particularly young people don't think when they're doing things like this. So, members, there is a huge fiscal impact. How we're going to pay for it, I don't know. But again, I know I'm not going to be voting for it.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 120 ayes and 11 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar today is House File 329. The Chief Clerk will report the bill. It's Mary Liz. Mary Liz.
House File 329, number 5 on the calendar for today, the second engrossment, an act relating to education.
The member from Dakota, Representative Bills, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 329, members, seeks to codify a long-standing Attorney General opinion in the state of Minnesota and a U.S. District Court ruling. Specifically, the bill enumerates political activities at a minimum that will be prohibited with public resources through district policy. House File 329 also provides clarification that said policy will only pertain to employees when they are in an official capacity. And lastly, the bill also enumerates that districts must provide factual information to the public regarding local ballot initiatives. So I've also provided, or what is coming around, is a copy of the Lakeville ISD 194 policy that was upheld by U.S. District Court in a 2004 case, and then I also provided a summary or a fact sheet about some Attorney General's opinions that you can see at your desk.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Atkins moving to amend House File 329. The second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 332.
I call upon the author of the amendment, the member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, this is I see that the amendment is just in the process of being distributed. It's a very simple amendment It's one sentence long. Representative Bills' legislation impacts political activity and political spending. So does my amendment. It's one sentence. It says a corporation organized under this chapter does not have the power to make corporate independent political expenditures. And with that, members, I'd appreciate a green vote.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I'd rise under House Rules 3.21, motions and propositions to be germane, and I'm prepared to offer advice.
State your advice, Representative Dean, to your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I believe Representative Adkins' amendment is actually a bill that might be once again appropriate to another bill. Representative Bill's legislation strictly deals with employees acting at a school, and obviously with children in this section of law. This would not only expand the scope of the bill and require a change, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the bill. Therefore, I would hope that the Speaker find the point of order well taken.
Advice to the Dean, point of order. Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice?
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Both the amendment and the bill impact political activity, both impact political spending, both involve the operations of boards. I'd appreciate that the point of order not be well taken.
Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice.
State your advice.
Rule 3.21, motions and propositions must be germane, says it has to be confined to the subject under consideration. The subject under consideration is political speech, and both the amendment and the bill deal with political speech. So I advise you to take the Dean point of order as not well taken.
Any further advice? Members, I have reviewed the amendment and the bill and the Rule 321, and I find that the Dean point of order is well taken.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appeal the ruling of the chair and I ask for a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Advice for the body.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Atkins.
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Could you please tell the body what a green vote means and what a red vote means in terms of whether or not we are looking to uphold your ruling?
The question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker, and a no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker.
And Mr. Speaker, advice.
Advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice to the body. It's very simple. This bill clearly is germane, folks. I recognize that you all got to do what you got to do, and the Speaker has to do what he has to do and rule these things non-germane. But they both impact political activity. They both impact political spending. They both impact how boards work in Minnesota. All you're trying to do is keep from being debated whether or not corporations can give money in political contests. The fact is Minnesotans by a vast, vast majority do not believe, and Representative Bills, maybe you'll get up and support this with me. They don't want corporations donating. Every time that we've seen that in Minnesota, their shareholders go nuts. What my amendment would do is simply give shareholders the right to tell their corporate boards, don't do this. Actually, former representative and former appellate court jurist Jack Davies brought this to me because he was hearing the same thing, which is that shareholders don't want their corporate boards making political contributions. Members, that's what this amendment does. It's clearly within the scope of the bill, which impacts political activity and political spending. Representative Dean, Majority Leader Dean, I know you don't want us to talk about it. If you want to take a bunch of corporate donations, I guess that's within your prerogative. But we should be at least able to discuss it in this body. And to have it ruled out of order, Mr. Speaker, is just plain wrong. So all I'm asking is let's just let the debate happen. Let's take a vote. Don't be afraid to take the vote on that particular question. But we should at least give Minnesotans the sense of whether or not their elected officials believe in corporate contributions or not. So, members, I would ask that you vote red and not uphold the ruling of the Speaker. With all due deference to the Speaker, who's a nice fella, every once in a while even the nicest fellas get one wrong sometimes. So thank you, members.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean, advice to the body.
Well, Mr. Speaker, advice. Representative Adkins' amendment, while it might be very appropriate for next November and elections and talking about corporate contributions, I can kind of see that as theme. It's missing an ALEC reference, but other than that, it looks pretty well informed for next November. But when we're crafting amendments to bills, they have to kind of fit, not like a hand in a glove, but or a round peg in a round hole, but they do have to fit. Representative Adkins, it doesn't even relate to the same section of law. You're a clever guy. You can come up with a way to find corporate contributions fitting inside Representative Bill's bill. And I think if you put your thinking cap on, you could probably come up with a germane way to make the same speech. Vote green and support the Speaker.
Advice to the body. A member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Members' advice. When we're looking at a question of germaneness under 3.21, the only point that Representative Dean has pointed to, or the only issue that Representative Dean has pointed to, is the section of statute. And that's, of course, a formality. The subject matter of the bill and the amendment are virtually identical. The bill prohibits employees from using the employer's resources to promote a certain political position or any kind of political position. The amendment does exactly the same thing. It says that the officers of a company, the employees, can't use company resources, which are not theirs, to advocate for a political position. It says that the principle is exactly the same. You shouldn't take the employer's money, whether it's public or private. You shouldn't use the employer's money to advocate a particular candidate, a particular ballot question, a particular point of view. And so they are exactly the same subject matter. They are exactly the same issue. And just because they are a different statute section doesn't mean that we're not talking about the same thing. I understand that it's more fun for Republicans to beat up on school employees and teachers in school districts than it is to point out that corporations are spending unlimited dollars in campaigns. I understand why that's more fun for you to talk about and why you'd want to hide behind a germaneness ruling instead of voting on corporations and their supposed free speech. But it doesn't mean that it's not germane. It just means you don't like it or you're afraid of it. And I think the people of Minnesota probably know that Republicans like to stand up for corporate special interests, and that's why you wouldn't want to do this. But it doesn't mean it's not germane, and it doesn't mean that we should ignore the parliamentary rules in front of us. So to me, it's a pretty red vote. If you think this bill is a good idea, that employees shouldn't be able to use the employer's resources to advocate a particular point of view, then you should say that the same principle applies to the officers of a company who want to use shareholder money to advocate for the officer's view of a particular political question. So it's a simple red vote, members.
Advice to the body. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice, members. We don't need to keep voting for things 62-72. A germaneness ruling is one where you can exercise your independent thought. This isn't about the bill passing or not passing. It's not about a Republican position on the bill or a Democratic position on the bill. This is one where members should feel free to be free agents. Take a look at your rules. And the rule for germaneness, 3.21. Our Speaker wasn't real crazy about it when we voted against her on germaneness, but sometimes we did. And what Rule 3.21 says is that the subject has to be the same as the bill. The subject we're talking about is political speech. The subject that animates Representative Bills to bring this bill forward is political speech. Representative Atkins' amendment fits very squarely within that subject matter. It's about political speech. So members, let's not see a 62-72 on this one. Let's see people all over the board, or actually preferably all red, disagreeing with the speaker, because this is clearly germane to the bill. Thank you.
Advice to the body. The member from Anoka, Representative Abler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And more just a process as opposed to the content. I can't beat the content discussions. And I'm almost persuaded. But in previous advice to the Speaker on germaneous rulings, I pointed out the proximity in other statutes to my particular version, and the Speaker wasn't really very friendly about that. But I want to point out that the bill is in Volume 4, and the amendment is in Volume 9. And so in my previous proximity, I attempted to make within a quarter or half an inch, doesn't fit here, and so they're a foot apart. And so I think the reviser agrees that these are really different topics. So thank you.
Advice to the body. The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Advice in supporting the ruling of the Speaker. This is definitely relates to public school employees, and it relates to education. And I think those on the other side of the aisle who would like to bring forth these prohibitions are welcomed to introduce bills that would be in line with what Representative Abler just addressed. So, members, please support the ruling of the Speaker.
Advice to the body. The member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, I rise in support of the Speaker's opinion on this point of order. Members, as we look at what the subject is, our statutes are organized according to subject. If we look at the amendment deals with Chapter 302A, which is business corporations, is a subject. If we look at Representative Bill's bill, it deals with school district policies. That's the subject of the bill. Members, this is not germane. Appreciate it, Mr. Speaker, and support your ruling.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will close the roll. There being 74 yeas and 58 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 329.
Third reading. Discussion to third reading. The member from Itasca, Representative Anzels.
Mr. Speaker, members and representative bills, as I read this proposal, two teachers who are, of course, employees of the school district would be prohibited under state law from visiting during the school day on school time about matters as mundane as the Republican presidential primary election that's going on throughout the news. I would assume that these two teachers who are employees on school time would be prohibited from discussing the election of school board members, and I would assume for sure that 2 teachers on their own time, also on school time, paid by school funds, would be prohibited from talking about the likelihood of a levy referendum in its passage. So will Representative Bills stand for a question?
He will yield. Representative Ansell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Representative Bills, if my assumptions are correct, who within the school building will enforce your proposal, and what will the consequences, crime, penalties, or reprimand be under your bill?
The member from Dakota, Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Anzels. The consequences, or there's no crime, though some did speak to that in committee. The consequences would be laid out in the district policy, which I provided an example of the Lakeville ISD 194 policy, which is in effect and was upheld by U.S. District Court. And actually, knowing some of those teachers down in Lakeville, they can still talk, carry on conversations. It's just that you can't use the school resources to advocate for any candidate or ballot measure.
Representative Ansell.
Well, Representative Bills, I'm not sure that I got a direct answer, but members, this will have a chilling effect on just common, ordinary, common sense conversation between 2 professionals in a public school setting. You know, our public schools have lifted more people out of poverty than probably any other institution in this great country. And it's a free flow of ideas and the free discourse that allows everyone the opportunity of self-expression. And I know those classroom teachers foster and promote our kids to express themselves and to have opinions and to be engaged in public discourse. And to say to our teachers who we charge with this responsibility that, oh, by the way, that all doesn't apply to you, to me is very damaging to the profession and very damaging to the democracy. I urge you to vote no.
Discussion to the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't sure whether the member from Olmsted was up first. Members, this bill violates the First Amendment. The school district is a governmental entity, and the governmental entities in this country cannot tell you what to talk about and how much to talk about it. The other thing about this bill that I think is it goes way too far. It prohibits teachers from, in the break room, talking about certain topics. It asks us to treat teachers differently than other employees. I passed out a news article about a company that actually asked its employees to get involved in politics and to talk about those topics on the work site. And so I don't know why we would want to tell teachers who actually have First Amendment rights protected in the workplace that they can't talk about political issues like everybody else. When Representative Bills was starting to talk about his legislation, he made reference to a court case and an Attorney General opinion that made me think maybe I was wrong about this First Amendment issue. But when you read carefully what Representative Bills has passed out, his bill is not at all consistent with what he's passed out. The issue in the Attorney General's opinion is the expenditure of resources. And what Representative Bills' bill does is it reaches into the teacher's private time at home on their computer using their email, or their private time on their lunch break in the staff break room. And I think, members, that we have an obligation not to be passing bills that violate the United States Constitution, and I'd ask you to vote no.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm rising in opposition to this particular bill. I've had the opportunity to hear it twice in committee. I raised my concerns there, and I'm going to raise them here with the larger body as well. The issues I'm going to raise, while I agree with my colleagues, are a little bit different. The issues I'm going to raise have to do with local control. Many districts, including my own, and we've seen here Lakeville, already have policies on book, and every district has the opportunity to adopt a policy about this very issue. Many of you in this room, I see a few heads nodding right now, know that your district has this policy, and that's where this issue belongs. Not a state-mandated rule, but indeed a policy with local elected officials making the decisions about what is right for their community and how strict or lenient they want that policy. I do acknowledge there are occasional violations of this, and in my district, because we have a policy, it's handled, and I certainly would recommend districts to do that. And as a board member and an MSBA delegate, years ago, I used to suggest that districts do this. We are now doing top-down government telling local units of government what to do, and I do have a concern with that. I would also say there's even a larger issue that concerns me, and that has to do with the issue of mandates. Some of you may remember my first year here, I had a little bill about parent involvement, and I've talked to many of you on the other side of the aisle and on my side of the aisle that are very concerned with parent involvement in the schools. And I tried to say, I'm not going to tell you what your policy has to say, but I'm going to ask that every district in this state have a policy about parent involvement. And you know what I was told? And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Randy Demmer and some of my friends who aren't here anymore, Representative Norton, you can't do that. It's a mandate. Minnesota School Board Association stood up and said that's a mandate. And so, of course, in law now, we have a bill that recommends school districts to have a policy on parent involvement. They may have a policy on parent involvement, but they don't. And unless we're willing to fund, and there is a fiscal note to this for local districts, the time and pay for the time and the effort that it's going to take that local unit to study the issue and write a policy, even though MSBA has model policies, we need to think twice about that. My local superintendent said, no mandates this year, please. We're in a crisis. We're trying to manage with a little bit of funds that we have. We're managing the shift that, the folks on the other side of the aisle passed. We're still dealing with that. Please, please, don't put any more mandates on me. And so I am standing up today to say, let's step back. Let's not pass a mandate. Let's not have top-down government telling locals what to do. And let's let those local officials who know their community best, who see these issues happen right in front of them, deal with that, and let's not continue the hypocrisy of saying local control and saying no new mandates, but then passing laws that do just the opposite.
The member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And there was Representative Bill's reference to handout, and Representative Anzlik, you'll see on the last page of the handout the disciplinary action, and clearly in Lakeville it's treated as part of the contract agreement with the different units. Representative Hartman, thank you. Actually, this issue was settled in federal court, and it was viewed as not a violation of free speech. And the federal court ruled in the case of Education Minnesota versus District 194 that the school boards, in fact, did have a right to set the tone of discourse within their schools. And because of the fact that the lawsuit was brought based on distribution of presidential campaign materials in the schools, and I don't know how many school districts there were in the time of the state of Minnesota, but that year only Forest Lake and Lakeville schools prohibited the union from distributing presidential campaign materials in the school. The union was able to reach a compromise agreement in Forest Lake, but Lakeville stood firm with their policy and took it to federal court and won. And we hear stories every single election cycle. My good friend here that sits next to me, on election day, his elementary school teacher on election day wearing the t-shirt of Majority Leader Dean's opponent stood out in the parking lot on election day with that t-shirt, greeting the students and family on Election Day with a T-shirt with Representative Dean's opponent. There was no policy, nobody stopped it, and Representative Dean's child was in tears that day because of the blatant campaigning going on in the school grounds in our school districts. Time and time again. What brought this to a head in the Lakeville schools was there was a yearly fundraiser where the specialty choral group put on a show and a dinner. And at every single place setting at that evening were the campaign materials for the teacher-endorsed school board candidates. And when one of the school staff members refused to take those materials and put them at each place setting, there was consequences for that particular employee, and many of the members of the public that attended that event were outraged that they would attend a school event where those campaign materials would greet them at their place settings as they were just trying to support their local students at a choral event, a fundraising event in the schools. Since this policy was enacted, we still have the same amount of discussion. You just can't advocate for or against. So it doesn't throttle the ability of the teachers to discuss issues in their classrooms. They just can't advocate for one position or another. So we have forums in our schools. In fact, Representative Simon will be participating, to my knowledge, in a forum in Lakeville schools related to the constitutional amendment defining marriage. They'll be on the ballot this fall. So this discussion around the fact that you can't have any of this speech going on in the schools is just not true. It's regulated and then you can't advocate for or against. And if there are public events, say, where I can give an example where there was a town hall meeting where Congressman Klein used one of the school facilities, then those, at the time there was a lot of anti-war protesters. So they were also allowed to attend the event, to have their signs. There was a balance of ideas presented in the school facility, but there's certain standards so that you don't have that total unbalance, if you will, and where certain groups have more access than others, and that we don't turn our students' backpacks into political advertising vehicles.
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Hortman, I appreciate you bringing this article out on the floor, headline NPR News. And you might recognize the name on the article. But I think the point about this is Representative Hortman was up on the floor talking about how there's no difference between what teachers and public officials are doing with school equipment on school time and what's being spoken to here. The point here is that it's perfectly okay for a private entity to share information with its employees, encourage them to advocate. What the story doesn't say is that the company doesn't allow them to do that on company equipment or on company time. And this is exactly what this bill speaks to. If you look at the bill, and this was just brought up a moment ago, such policies shall not prohibit public employees from engaging in political activities, except when they are performing duties assigned to them under their employment contract with the district or representing their employer in an official capacity. Seems reasonable to me. I bet if I ran this by my constituents, I'd get 90% or more saying this is a good idea. Such policies shall not prohibit the use of public funds for disseminating factual information about a proposition appearing on a local ballot. Seems reasonable. The point here, folks, is we have a lot of email that we end up getting on political issues, partisan issues, that is headlined coming from accounts that are publicly owned, taxpayer funded, and during regular work hours when these people are supposedly doing their taxpayer funded jobs. And I got to tell you, a majority of Minnesotans are not pleased with that. They don't want taxpayer dollars and employees who are being funded by taxpayer dollars advocating partisan positions with equipment purchased by the taxpayers on taxpayer time. That's what this bill gets at. That's what this bill gets at. It's a perfectly reasonable proposal, and I'd encourage a green vote.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my friend from Olmsted yield for a question? I only have one friend from Olmsted, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Norton yield for a question?
I think she says yes.
Mr. Speaker, and to the member from Olmsted, you referenced MSBA in your comments. Can you tell me what MSBA's position is on this bill?
Representative Norton.
When it was in our committee, MSBA had concerns. The bill has changed since that time, and I believe they don't have the concerns that they did originally, but they do have concerns about mandates.
Representative Garofalo.
Would Representative Norton yield to another question?
She will yield. Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Norton, outside of the teachers union, can you name a single education group that is opposed or voiced opposition to this bill in its current form?
Representative Norton.
Representative Garofalo, I serve on one committee, and in that committee, almost every group testified against it. I've not heard of from anyone else about this bill. The concerns I have about the bill are personal and my own, based on my experiences 8 years on the Rochester School Board and 6 years as a state representative.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Norton, you had referenced MSBA in your comments, so perhaps members were somehow tricked into thinking that there were legitimate education organizations that were opposed to this this bill, and the fact is there are none. It has broad bipartisan support, and I would ask members to support the bill. Thank you.
Member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the bill yield?
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bill's concern that I have, this is a short bill. I didn't have the opportunity to hear it in committee, of course, but one question I have about this is why you have not included here any non-public schools that may get publicly funded help, publicly funded things from the state. And I'm thinking in particular of, for instance, schools that get transportation, and I know we give private schools a number of assists with various things. So could you please address that? Do you think it's not a problem if they use those facilities for advocating for, say a teacher gets on a bus with students and advocates some position? Is that a problem for you, or is it only if it's a public employee?
Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. No, those did not pertain to the Attorney General opinions that I had read or what I had researched.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think, thank you for that answer, Representative Bills. I don't know if that, it strikes me that what's good for the goose is good for the gander here. Maybe goose and gander aren't really the right analogy, but I would think that if we're not going to allow public monies to be used in this way, that we ought to be consistent across a lot of places, other places where public money is being used. So that's one problem that I have with this. Another problem that I have is the very thing that Representative Gottwald mentioned, which is on line 1.19 and 1.20, or up to those three lines, 1.19 to 1.21. It's great to say that you have this exemption, but the problem I see here is that it uses the term factual information, and it's okay to use the public funds to disseminate factual information if the information is factual and does not advocate for and against. It's really hard, as you know, in the heat of any campaign to decide what is factual. Sometimes there can be great disputes over what the facts are. And Representative Gottwald is nodding his head. I think that this is creates a lot of trouble in this bill, and for me it kind of shows how difficult this whole thing is and why we shouldn't be mandating this at the state level. I guess I'd like to ask Representative Bills if he would yield again, Mr. Speaker.
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bills, under your bill, who is to be the arbiter of whether this is, first of all, what you consider local? I don't know if there could be disputes about that, but more importantly, whether information that's disseminated is factual. Who's going to decide that if somebody's trying to use an exemption?
Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling. The school district does that, and our school district, our superintendent does that along with a steering committee, and I believe that is the way it is also done in Lakeville and other districts.
Representative Liebling.
Well, Mr. Speaker and members, I think that really creates a problem. You know, if we're gonna ban political speech, I mean, I think it's a problem to begin with. But when you try to make exemptions like this, you're basically saying, you know, somebody gets to decide. You're putting out information at your peril to whether somebody else decides it's factual or not, and to whether somebody else decides that you're advocating or not. You know, if I say that the GOP cost taxpayers a lot of money, raised everybody's property taxes, you might say, well, that's not factual. You know, I mean, and it's in the political arena, and people have to decide what's factual. So I think you're creating a lot of problems with this bill, and when we're talking about people's First Amendment rights and wading into this, I think you're just opening a big can of worms, and I think you're going to be asking for some lawsuits. And again, when you do that, you give lawyers, you do create jobs, and it's jobs for lawyers.
The member from Anoka, Representative Tilbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield?
He will yield. Representative Tilbury.
Representative Bills, in your particular bill, I just have one question. Do corporations, do they ever receive public funding of any kind?
Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Tilbury. My bill is not about corporations.
Representative Tilbury.
And would he continue to yield?
He will. Representative Tilbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the point, though, that I would try to make with that, I think was made earlier about public funds being used and how taxpayers would be upset with that. And I guess the comment that I would make to you, and then I'll have a question, is that there have been, like I saw an email one time from a corporation in my area that said, if you pass, or if the bill passes, let's just call it House File 2500 passes, you could get laid off. And so I'm wondering if that particular corporation, doesn't that seem a little funny that one, if it's public, and also like an angel investment piece where I think we put in, you know, 20 million or something or more than that of public funds, shouldn't that have the same situation happen as your bill?
Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Tilbury, and I just need a clarification. Are you saying that email is going out at their business, or yes? I think you're shaking your head. That's their private business. This bill pertains to, you know, and I guess now would be the time to say this for those people listening. I've been a public school teacher for 18 years. I still actually teach my first hour at Rosemount High School, as many of you, if not all of you know, every day before coming here. So I don't see, I've heard some things mentioned, some things are just a little laughable, that like worrying about teachers expressing their opinions. If you've ever been in a teacher's lounge, you don't have to worry about teachers expressing their opinions. What my bill pertains to is where I've worked for the past, you know, over a decade and a half. It pertains to public schools. So it doesn't pertain to anyone's private property. This bill doesn't pertain to a teacher going home or using, you know, their own technology. It just pertains to the public resources. Just to clarify.
Representative Tilbury.
Thank you. And just one more question. It just seems like a double standard that you kind of have placed here, where teachers are in one category, but when corporations also may receive some type of public funding, they can basically do whatever they want because it's their private stuff. And here we have a situation where an employee is being persuaded to do something or they'll lose their job. It could be that blatant that it could be put in there. So then under your particular bill where you use the same philosophy of, it's public dollars, couldn't that also apply to a corporation that has some public funding?
You're asking Representative Bills to yield?
Yes.
He will yield. Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Tilbury. And that would be something that I would definitely see that as another bill that could move along. This bill just pertains to public resources. So that's a blend between private and public, I think, that you're talking about, and that would be a subject for another day, or a bill could be offered on that separately.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Tilbury.
Then I guess my final question, Mr. Speaker, to the author would be, would you be open to a friendly amendment?
He will yield. Representative
Thank you, Mr.
Bills.
Speaker. Representative Tilbury. No, I have worked it has changed considerably. I know Representative Norton had seen this last year when it came out. I have worked very hard to find common ground. There are people there are groups who didn't want it to change at all, obviously, and there are people who literally spoke out in committee about taking the 1927 Attorney General opinion, saying that spending the money of the taxpayers for such purposes is against public policy and illegal. That's the words of our Attorney General. So there were people in committee who came forward saying that this should be a crime, something I don't agree with, and hopefully, and I hope that I have found common enough ground here to provide or to hopefully elicit bipartisan support. So,
Representative Tilbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I was just kind of looking for a yes or no answer, but that's okay. I kind of figured you'd say no, but one of the things that would just be is you said it in your statement of public dollars. If it's taxpayer dollars, then why couldn't it apply also to corporations that receive tax dollars or public tax dollars in some form or another, and we could put it together right here on the House floor and just have that oral amendment include everyone rather than having a double standard.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Representative Bills, I just heard you describing the conversations in a teacher's lounge. I've been in a teacher's lounge as well, which raises a question for me on line 1.10 of your bill. Representative Bills, one of the resources that's publicly funded is time. So, Representative Bills, I'm not going to ask you to yield, but it sounds to me like your bill would make those conversations in the teacher's lounge impermissible. Because time's a resource. If you're on school time, you're talking to somebody in the teacher's lounge, certain conversations would be prohibited under your bill, and those conversations would be political ones. I could pass another teacher and I could ask, did you vote today? Or get out and vote today. In the teacher's lounge, your bill would not allow that political speech.
We're on third reading. Member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to just respond to the very good points that were raised by Representative Holberg, and I agree with Representative Holberg very much that we do not want teachers campaigning on school time. I don't think anybody on this side of the aisle or anywhere in the state supports the idea that teachers would use public time when they're in front of their students or resources, any money or copy paper that belongs to the school. What I object to in this bill is the words facilities on line 1.10 and email on 1.11, because I cannot imagine any way in which a teacher in their living room on their laptop sending an email to another teacher is costing the school district any money. And this bill would forbid that teacher from using their email address on their own time, in their own property, to have a conversation with another teacher. And it also controls the break room, very clearly controls the break room. So while I could support legislation that said it shouldn't be the expenditure of public dollars and something that's very tight as to the time a teacher is supposed to be teaching, I agree with you completely, Representative Holberg. That's totally inappropriate, and I couldn't support that. But this bill goes way, way beyond those boundaries.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mariani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's what I get for wearing an orange shirt against the backdrop here. I was telling Representative Greiling that years ago, Representative Dorman used to sit back over there against that beige wall. He had this wonderful, beautiful beige suit, and he would just totally disappear into it. I think we pointed it out to him once, and he stopped wearing the suit to the floor. Representative Bills, your bill is better than, in my opinion, than when it was introduced, and I think you should be commended for doing that. When we were in committee, I pointed out to you the language on line 1.15, political purposes, and so I'm wondering if maybe you could just yield for a very quick question. And Representative Bills, the question is, because I did express concern about what seems to be pretty simple language, but I think is actually awfully broad. Is there, and I don't know the answer to this, is there a definition of political purposes in state statute that this can reference back to?
Representative Bills will yield. Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Mariani. No, there is not.
Representative Mariani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Bills. I suspect not also, and I really don't know the answer to that. But I think part of what you're hearing here on the floor, in addition to some other valid concerns, is that when we try to write statutes and law, we really want to be as specific as possible, so as to avoid mischief down the line for people taking great liberties relative to whatever language we pass. And here we are talking about, members, people's employment. I mean, these are high stakes, outcomes relative to, any kind of management decisions that a school board might make, or a principal, or a superintendent. And so I do think it's incumbent on us to be very clear and very specific and very constrained in our legislation. And a number of people have gotten up and spoken on a number of issues related to this, but I suspect, Representative Bills, you're trying to address some issues that I think many of us, probably have some agreement about, but I think your bill is really still not ready for prime time here, because I do think you run the risk here of inviting all sorts of mischief down the line with people in management and leadership positions interpreting much more than what we're intending here in statute. And I don't have to repeat for many of you the history of teachers over many decades. In the 60s and the 70s, it was very common to have public school teachers really almost brutally at the whim of arbitrary decision making on the part of school boards and principals and superintendents. And so much of what we have in statute was an attempt to provide some balance and protection to that. And my fear here is that this bill pushes in the wrong direction in regards to that historical tradition that we've created in the state to make sure that we have good balanced policy making relative to our public schools, relative to the rights of our professional teachers. So, Representative Bills, you're a good guy. I like you. I wish you well as you go forward from this body, but I really can't support your bill at this point.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Greiling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I too urge a no vote on this bill. And I am not an attorney, so the attorneys, I think, have beaten to death all the legal reasons why this language is vague, and we have reason to vote against it. But my reason for voting against it is because we should be encouraging political activity. We want teachers and education knowledgeable people and parents who are active in the schools to be engaged. We're trying to get them here and hear their voices. Representative Garofalo is often calling for people who aren't paid lobbyists to be the ones first in line to talk to us. Well, members, these are the people, the real people. They're in the schools. Their parents are active. This original bill wanted to clamp down, and we even had somebody here from Roseville to clamp down on the Roseville Parents and Staff Action Committee, where they take positions and contact me and other legislators from the Roseville area schools. And that, in my mind, is a good thing. Democracy only works if the grassroots are paying attention. We should be not trying to put roadblocks in there. And then my final point, members, is, with technology nowadays, it used to be in the schools you could use the telephone that we were tethered to when I was teaching for anything you wanted, because that was considered a tool. It wasn't really something that was only used for school activities. If I wanted to call my legislator, my husband, my children on the telephone, I could do that. Now we have computers, and we have texts, and we have all these other things. I think we have to try to look to how can that work, to have the grassroots give us input. They take breaks. They're not working every single second that they're in the school building. And that's my problem with this bill. I'm very glad that it got gutted in education finance, so it doesn't do much of anything. But it still gives the wrong message. It says, no, we don't want your input, you people in the schools and you parents who are active. And I say we should say yes to them and no to this bill.
Member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. This is a very narrowly designed prohibition. This in no way discourages our public employees in our school districts from visiting with us, from coming here and calling us off the House floor, coming to our offices. The intent of this legislation, from my perspective, is to ensure that we do not use tax dollars, just like we don't, using our laptops, to promote a particular candidate or to promote a particular referendum question. That's for us to decide when we are in our private lives outside the taxpayer-funded facility in which we work and teach. And it's very important, members, that we protect the right to free speech, but that at the same time we honor that which the taxpayers provide. And that's a public setting for us to teach that which is prescribed for in our curricula. So, members, looking at this provision and knowing that Representative Bills worked long and hard to narrow the scope of this, he worked with the stakeholders, and it took several weeks for him to come up with this draft that then moved through finance. And members, I think we're overreacting. This is just to advocate against the election or defeat of any candidate, use of public technology, for example, and to advocate the passage or defeat of any referendum question. That's has to be in the policy so that the use of this equipment is not used for that or to solicit for political purposes, just like we don't do using our taxpayer-funded equipment. Members, this is protection of the taxpayers, and this is a legitimate way to look at a prohibition of political activities by our public school employees. Thank you, members, for voting green.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Bills yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Winkler.
Representative Bills, in line 1.14 of your bill, it is subpart 2. It says, advocate the passage or defeat of any referendum question. And I wonder if you could provide for us your understanding of the definition of a referendum question.
Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Winkler, that would be like a local levy or ballot initiative.
Representative Winkler.
Mr. Speaker, if Representative Bills would yield to another question.
He will yield. Representative Winkler.
Representative Bills, as I read your bill, you are leaving open a loophole which would allow school resources to be able to be used for advocating a statewide constitutional amendment. And I wonder if that's an intentional gap that you're leaving, or if you'd like to amend your bill in order to prohibit school property from being used to advocate for a constitutional amendment.
Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Winkler, I don't believe the bill does that, and it is the third reading there where we cannot amend this bill.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bills, we are on third reading, but third reading can be, we can reverse that. We can return to the previous question and go back to second reading, and it does leave that open because the language I think you need in law, if you want to talk about a statewide ballot question, is a ballot question or a statewide ballot question. And you are leaving open the possibility that school districts and school staff can use state or public resources to advocate for a statewide ballot question because they're not prohibited from doing so under this policy. And I would urge you to, if you're sincere about this, that we reconsider third reading and move back and actually fix your bill so that it would apply to ballot questions. Or you may create the suspicion that you're intentionally leaving this open so that teachers or administrators or members of the public can use school resources for the sake of advocating for a constitutional amendment of which you seem so fond. Mr. Speaker, maybe it looks like Representative Bills would like to respond, so I would ask him to yield.
He will yield. Representative Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Winkler. I don't believe the bill does that. A local ballot is mentioned in the bill, and I don't believe any school district would do that.
Representative Winkler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Bills. That's wonderful. I don't believe that anybody would use their school property for any unethical or improper purpose either. And we do have an Attorney General's opinion stating that they can't do it, and we have this nice memo from the auditor saying they can't do it. We've got a district court or a federal court ruling saying that policies that prohibit them from doing so are legal. So we really don't need this bill at all. And if we're going to have this bill to be clear, what you're doing is opening up a loophole. You're opening up a loophole that says that teachers can go out and tell their students that gay marriage is a bad thing and they should urge their parents to vote for the constitutional amendment. You're leaving a loophole open for teachers or administrators or anyone else to tell their students that illegal immigrants are voting for Democrats, so therefore they have to vote for this voter ID amendment, whatever kind of nonsense they want to spew forth. And if you have any question about whether school districts and school staff might have concerns or questions about what they can say on the issue of gay marriage, I would refer you to the Anoka-Hennepin School District. So you are leaving a loophole. You're leaving something wide open for constitutional amendments, statewide ballot questions, unless you fix your bill. And if you don't fix it, I think it provides ample reason to vote no, because you're leaving something wide open in an area that you profess to want to close up and shut down. So I think it's a serious problem with this piece of legislation, and I would urge you to fix it before we vote on this bill in final form. I wish, and there's another point here, members, and Representative Tilbury made it, but just to point out that Representative Gottwald's statement about how appropriate it is for private employers to use private resources to advocate for certain political positions, it didn't take me very long to find a story in the Pipestone County Star News. I don't know who represents Pipestone County, but there we go, back there. Schumacher has Pipestone County. Coburn's got a nice big TIF subsidy down in Pipestone County to open up a store. A check from all the other taxpayers, all the property taxpayers in the county saying, here you go, here's a subsidy, build your store here, here's your public assistance, here's your taxpayer money, go ahead and build your store and make money. Guess what? Using public money. Representative Gottwald, thanks for coming back. Coburn's takes public money in order to run their business. So I don't know why we would pass a bill like this, which is, I think, in addition to the fact that you have this big gap for your constitutional amendments, in addition to that fact, you're singling out schools. There are lots of people who receive public subsidy, public money, but we're not touching them in this bill. We're not touching them at all. What you're doing is, as you've done all session and all last session, you are targeting public employees for special treatment and special persecution for some reason. I think it's just, I don't know, antipathy towards collective bargaining, antipathy towards the middle class, some kind of dislike of the idea that people would actually have a say in their employment. I don't know what it is, But for some reason, you've been targeting public employees, and this bill is another anti-public employee bill. You're not touching Coburns. You're not touching all the other people in the state who receive taxpayer dollars and want to talk about political issues. You're leaving open this big gap. And then the final point I would make about your bill is that you're saying that teachers in the faculty lounge can't advocate the election or defeat of any candidate for public office. That means it is against state law for a teacher to be in a faculty lounge and say, "I think you should vote for Kurt Bills. He's a good guy." I think it's a ridiculous standard that you're putting in place, and it's a typical anti-teacher, anti-public employee bill. It might be watered down, but the intention is still the same.
The member from Anoka, Representative Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Winkler, members. Representative Winkler, say what you will about this bill and the amendment. I just want to state for the record that the Anoka-Hennepin School District has never, and I don't believe ever intends to, advocate for a constitutional ballot measure, nor have they ever advocated for the marriage amendment, and I believe that your statement should be retracted or at least rephrase what you had said.
You're not asking him to yield, are you?
Well, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you. Since he chose to respond, what I said is that there could be concern or there might be interest or there might be doubt in school districts about what they can or can't say about the issue of gay marriage. And if you have any question about whether school district employees can be uncertain about what they can say or not say about gay marriage, Anoka-Hennepin is a good example of a place where people aren't sure what they can say or not say. And this amendment in this bill leaves that amendment question and that debate and that discussion wide open and unaddressed.
Discussion to third reading. Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Just real briefly, first of all, Representative Morrow, your example of asking somebody, did you vote today? That's really not advocating for or against a position or a particular candidate. So I think that was maybe beyond the scope of the bill as it's written. But I can tell you feedback from teachers. You say that this is anti-public employee. Not all public employees in the school districts appreciate all the emails that they get. And hearing from teachers in other districts that as the election approaches and someday receiving more than 24 emails in one day telling them how to vote for particular candidates from the federal all the way through the local level that come into their email boxes during the school day, they don't appreciate it. And so there are many school employees that would appreciate having this policy, and the issue about a teacher not being able to use their school email to email another teacher from their home at night, I don't know why we are providing taxpayer-paid email addresses for personal time activities of teachers. Now, that may be a standard in the industry, but as we all know, and some people in this room actually have received email responses from me when I get political ads or contacts here at my work email. I always respond, please remove me from your email list. State resources are not to be used for campaign purposes. If you need to contact me regarding such a item, you can use my home email address. And so, you know, maybe it's a standard perk of being a school employee that you can use that email nights and weekends for whatever you like, but maybe that's not such a good idea given all the things that can be accessed with email and email addresses on the internet these days.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Breinert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple of points. The first one reiterates something that Representative Norton referred to, and that's the jurisdiction of local school boards. This is an issue of local control. And it's one thing to broadly say that school boards should develop a policy, but the detail in this bill that is undefined makes it very problematic for local school boards. I happen to have served on a local school board for 12 years. We have a policy in place around these issues, but some of the policies that we have would actually be in violation of this proposal here. One of them is the use of public facilities. We allow our bargaining units meet in our public facilities. We have public groups that might work for or against a ballot initiative that are allowed to convene in our public spaces, and they include public employees among those groups. Those public uses of these facilities would be prohibited by this bill. So that's a very serious concern to me. So I would just have members reflect on the authority that you're taking away from your local jurisdictions to make these decisions as they best reflect the commitments of the local communities to responsible public decision making.
A member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will Representative Holberg yield?
She will yield. Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Holberg, point well taken. You're right. Did you vote today is probably not a very good example, so I'm going to try a different one. What if a teacher in a teacher's lounge said, I hope the referendum passes today?
Representative Holberg.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Morrow, I'm not sure that that's advocating for or against. I think that's just expressing an opinion.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Holberg, that's also a fair answer. I'm not sure whether it is or not. And folks, that's the problem when you try to limit the First Amendment and political speech. You get administrators, and Representative Holberg, you're not an administrator, I don't mean you, but you get administrators who might come into teachers now and say, you know what? I think that's advocacy when you say, I hope the referendum passes. You just violated our school policy. But another administrator could walk and say, no, that was just expressing a hope. That wasn't advocating. And we'd get into a debate over what the verb advocating is. And folks, the reason we have a First Amendment is for political speech. So Representative Holberg, I, like Representative Portman, thinks a lot of good things in this bill. But the idea of time being one of the resources, and knowing that some of a teacher's time is spent with other adults in places like a teacher's lounge or on a playground or elsewhere, if the word time were out of this bill, I'd be more comfortable. Not completely comfortable, but more comfortable, because, Representative Holberg, it leaves that uncertainty. I don't know what I can say. Is this advocacy or is it not?
Discussion on third reading. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 73 yeas and 60 nays, the bill is passed and the title agreed to. If there's no objection, we'd like to revert to messages from the Senate. Seeing no objection, messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate files herewith transmitted. Senate files 201, 248, 1626, 1717, 1875, 1964, 2069, 2084, 2137, 2273, 2297, 2392, and 2394.
Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file, herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment the concurrence to the House is respectfully requested. House File 2455, an act relating to the City of Montgomery. Gruenhagen moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2455, that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
Calling the member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Yeah, I support the move to refer this to a conference committee to settle the differences between the House and Senate file.
Any further discussion? Any discussion? Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the motion just describe for us what the differences are between the Senate and the House bills?
He will yield. Representative Gruenhagen.
Yeah, basically mine was a specialty bill. It addressed just the a city in the district of my existing district, the City of Montgomery. The Senate came back with language that addressed the entire state. And so we need to settle that difference in caucus.
Any further discussion to the motion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. First reading of Senate bills.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 201, an act relating to crimes. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Introduction and first reading of Senate File 248, an act relating to health. Hamilton moves that Senate File 248 and House File 383, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1626, an act relating to human services. Norton moves that Senate File 1626, House File 2094, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
If there's no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1717. Lemire moves that House File 1717 and Senate File 1717, House File 2087, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1875, a bill for an act relating to insurance. Doubt moves that Senate File 1875, House File 2307, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1964, an act relating to labor and industry. Stensrud moves that Senate File 1964, House File 2263, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2069, an act relating to insurance. Loon moves that Senate File 2069, House File 2504, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2084, an act relating to public safety. Cornish moves that Senate File 2084 and House File 2415, now on the calendar for the day, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2137, an act relating to insurance. Hoppy moves that 2137, House File 2515, 53 now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2273, an act relating to public safety. Swazinski moves that Senate File 2273, House File 2736, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2297, an act relating to crime victims. Vogel moves that Senate File 2297, House File 1899, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2392, an act relating to liquor. Atkins moves that Senate File 2392, House File 2784, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2394, an act relating to transportation. Fabian moves that Senate File 2394, House File 2775, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Any objections? If not, so ordered. Okay. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1983. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 1983, number 6 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to education finance.
I'll call on the author of the bill, the member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill passed on the Education Finance Committee with no audible opposition. It is opposed by no one. Will save the department about $1,000 in reporting and is not needed due to the successful waiver application to the federal government. I would ask for members' support.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1983.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Discussion to the bill. The member from Ramsey, Representative Greiling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The bill is fine, in my opinion. Vote yes.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 133 yeas and 0 nays, the bill is passed and the title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1917.
Senate File 1917, number 7 on the calendar for the day, the first engrossment, an act relating to education.
We'll call on the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Davnie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd first like to substitute the House language for the Senate language. It's better.
Representative Davnie moves to insert the House language.
Davnie moving to amend Senate File 1917, the first engrossment as follows. Delete everything after the enacting clause and insert the language of House File 2293, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded DEA 2293.
Discussion to the amendment. If not, all in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. The amendment is adopted. Representative Davnie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, This legislation was brought to me by the intermediate school districts in the metropolitan area who deal with some of our most challenging students. Students who are unfortunately, because of mental illness, because of other issues, may sometimes be dangerous to themselves or to others. Minnesota statute, much of which was passed last year regarding the use of prone restraints with those children, limits the use of prone restraints only to emergency situations when they're a threat to themselves or others, and conditions in a number of different ways its usage, only with specifically and properly trained staff using appropriate techniques and curriculum in the training, who report that the use of that restraint, who've assessed whether the child has any physical or psychological contraindications that would override the use of the restraint procedures, and requires that these incidents or these uses of restraint be reported to the State Department of Education so we can start to gather data. The legislation last year prohibited any use of prone restraint after August 1st of this year. This legislation extends that prohibition by 1 year to August 1st of 2013, further conditions the use of prone restraint for the safety of the student, and requires additional data collection and the development through a stakeholder process of a plan to eliminate the use of prone restraint in Minnesota schools. The legislation is supported by NAMI of Minnesota, the National Association of the Mentally Ill, by PACER, the Minnesota Association of Special Education, the intermediate school districts that I've already mentioned, the Minnesota Rural Education Association, the Minnesota School Boards Association, Schools for Equity in Education, and the Minnesota Association of School Administrators. I ask for your support as well. Thank you.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1917, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is a very good provision that Representative Davnie worked long and hard on to make sure that we reached agreement between the stakeholders. This is important for our students, for our teachers, and for school staff, so please support it.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too rise in support of this. Thank you, Representative Davnie. As a former emotional behavior disorder instructor, I know the importance of this for the safety of our students and our staff in our schools. So, members, I urge a green vote as well.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson S.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the member, Representative Davnie, yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Davnie, can you tell me why that we have prone restraints placing a child face down on the floor, I imagine, why we would do that down to age 5?
Representative Davnie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, as you may know, I trust from your question that you've reviewed the bill. Current law has no prohibition on the use of prone restraint in young children. This legislation does set that limit. I think the video that the intermediate school districts showed in committee was particularly persuasive for many members of seeing what some of the behaviors can be with these children. Some of them are significantly disabled in that respect. This is about protecting their safety when they're a threat to themselves and others, also protecting the safety of other students and staff.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Davnie yield to another question?
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Davnie, if this law does not take place, if we don't pass this bill, what happens after that point?
Representative Davnie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, that's a great question. There's a small handful of states that have banned prone restraint in all situations. There's a much larger number that, like Minnesota, ban it except in cases of emergency. The reason that the stakeholders, including the advocate community, has come forward is we don't know what happens with these children if we don't allow some use in emergencies of prone restraints. Are they placed on homebound and withdrawn from the social milieu that they need as children and receive lesser educational opportunity? Are they, instead of being restrained by a staff member who they have a therapeutic as well as academic relationship with? Or are the police called, the police come in, they're not trained in these same restraint procedures, they're tackled, they're handcuffed, they're arrested, and they're taken down to juvenile detention. That's not a positive impact for students. What this legislation does is call on the State Department of Education and stakeholders to develop a plan and a strategy to get us to zero restraints in a way that's knowledgeable, data-based, and positive for the students involved.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Davnie. I appreciate that answer to that question. I am really concerned with this legislation. I understand where Representative Davnie is coming from on this issue, that it does go down to age 5. My son is 4 years old. He would be able to enter kindergarten next year, and he is about 42 pounds right now. And I can't imagine him having the experience of being placed face down on the floor for whatever reason that may be. And given his size and everything, and he's a normal-sized 4-year-old, it's not like he's smaller than any other average one that you would have. And I understand that the video that you watched was for middle school children. I would advocate that maybe you look at the age requirement on this and change it from 5 years old and have it be more appropriate given the size of the children. So, members, I'm going to be voting no. Thank you.
Discussion on third reading. Representative Anderson. B. Anderson B.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would the author of the bill yield?
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Davnie, the stakeholders involved with this, are they okay with all the provisions that are in your House file versus what is in the Senate file?
Representative Davnie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and another Representative Anderson. Yes, the stakeholders that I read off, the broad group, were involved in a process led, I need to credit NAMI of Minnesota, on leading that and arriving at this consensus language in the legislation.
Representative Anderson. Discussion on third reading. Seeing no further discussion on third reading, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 116 yeas and 16 nays, the bill is passed and title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2239. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2239, number 15 on the calendar for the day, the first engrossment, an act relating to motor vehicles.
Call on the author of the bill from Olmsted, Representative Benson M.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2232 is a bill that amends regulations of antique vehicles. and those are those that are manufactured or were manufactured before 1936, that they have been extensively restored primarily to allow the vehicle to bear a special Pioneer license plates and change the title application and the type of title issued for the vehicle. The group that brought me this bill are folks that are very passionate about the restoration of old vehicles, and their concerns have been that recently the titling and plating of these vehicles have changed. Many of these cars are found in very, very poor condition, and they take literally hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars, if not $100,000, to restore. And it has been the practice over the years to title them differently, but lately they have been coming back titled as reconstructed vehicles and having a date on the title of the year, the make of the car, when they were last restored, rather than the originating year of the vehicle. So a 1910 vehicle, a 1910 Buick that had tens of thousands of dollars invested in it would come back with a title of 2010. And so you can imagine the loss of value between those. So the concern of these folks was that, in fact, the car of which I speak was a 1910 Buick, and it was a car owned by Judge Alan Page, and it was his car that came back in that condition. So this is probably the most bipartisan bill that I'll ever author, with the second signer being Representative Kahn.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Benson M. moving to amend House File 2239, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A2.
Call on the author of the amendment, Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I was corrected. I'm speaking of Bill House File 2239. The A2 amendment, members, that you have before you was the last piece. As this passed out of transportation, there was a small fiscal note, and this was the last piece in the valley between the director of the DVS, Ms. McCormick, and the authors of the bill. It does place a little bit more of the onus on the folks that are doing the restoration to provide the evidence necessary to come up with the date. One of the things that was going on is that DVS would supply a VIN number that would then be taped to the vehicle. It had absolutely no bearing on that vehicle, and the piece in the valley was that it will be up to the restorer to come up with the number on the block or the frame and provide that evidence to DVS, and that eliminated the fiscal note.
Discussion to the amendment. Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2239 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to third reading. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill as amended. The clerk will close the roll. There being 133 yeas and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2187. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2187, number 11 on the calendar for the day, the first engrossment, an act relating to public safety.
We'll call on the author of the bill, the member from Candio High, Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill came to me from the Minnesota auto dealers, and it's simply trying to allow auto dealers some additional flexibility for the storage that they provide for license plates and the tabs, the stickers. Now that they're using the optional computerized vehicle registration system, what it's trying to do is hopefully get more auto dealers involved with the computerized registration and help speed up the process that they go through instead of waiting the 3 months that typically is being done now by DVS for them to get their title. For a nominal extra fee, they can speed that process up to have their license plates and registration within 10 days. So that's Section 1. And in Section 2, I do have an amendment that will delete Section 2, and then the final section of the bill happens to deal with the lien release that the auto dealers could now help customers get the lien release from a previous lien holder if it's more than 7 years old. So it just gives them the authority to help their customers do that. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll wait for the amendment.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Vogel moving to amend House File 2187, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
The author of the amendment, Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment simply deletes Section 2 of the original bill because that had a fiscal note attached to it. So by removing that, we removed any fiscal note to the bill. And I appreciate your support on the amendment. Thank you.
Discussion to the amendment. Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. The amendment is adopted. There being no further amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2187 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion on third reading. Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and members. I want to thank Representative Vogel for bringing this bill forward. I've had several comments in the last couple of weeks of people taking 8, 10, 11 weeks to get a transfer done. So if anything we can do to speed up that process, I want to say thank you. So I stand in support of the bill and encourage member support.
Further discussion on third reading. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. Representative Lilly votes aye. There being 131 yeas and 1 nay, the bill is passed as amended and title agreed to.
Yep.
The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1813. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 1813, number 25 on the calendar for today, the third engrossment, an act relating to state government.
We'll call on the author of the bill, a member from Olmsted, Representative Benson M.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 1813 is a bill that requires the Commissioner of Administration to make available under the Master Contract Program a list of eligible contractors who can assist state agencies in using data analytics to, one, accomplish agency reorganization along service rather than functional lines in order to make provide more efficient and effective service, and to bring about internal reorganization of management functions in order to flatten out the organizational structure by requiring that decisions are made closer to the service needed, eliminating redundancies, and optimizing the span of control ratios to public and private sector industry standards. Members, this is very permissive. If you remember from last year, we had a portion of the state government finance bill that addressed data analytics and the use of making government agencies more efficient. This just goes a little bit farther in delineating in that statute that there's a requirement that a piece be added that emphasizes upper-level management to make sure that it is ran more efficiently. I would direct a member's attention actually to the MMB website, and it starts with Data Analytics Master Contract Program for more information. But this is something that's ongoing, and it's very permissive. Actually, the Commissioner would be required in January of next year to come back with a report about having it done and who, if anyone, any of the agencies used it. I would add that in the beginning there was a fiscal note, but we were able to manage to get it to using existing contracts that have already been let, with 22 firms that have already provided information through an RFP that was let last summer. So this would add no additional cost.
There are no amendments at the desk, so the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1813.
Third reading. Discussion to third reading. The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will the author yield?
He will yield. Representative Simon.
Thank you. Representative Benson, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to keep track here. I heard this in two different committees. I think it was in the Government Operations Committee and then again in the State Government Finance Committee. And I remember there were some concerns by the Department of Administration, and according to what I remember, you and others had said you'd worked with them to allay some of their concerns. Can you describe what your progress has been since at least that committee, and whether you believe you allayed their concerns, and if not, why not?
Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Simon. We did iron out all the differences. Actually, when it was presented the first time, it was heard twice in state government finance, and we brought it back from the floor to go to our back from Ways and Means to go back there. And what we worked out was that it wouldn't require any additional RFP work. That we would use the existing 22 or the existing contracts with the 22 agencies that have already applied for this.
Further discussion on third reading. Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess my question is, why do we need this legislation? Maybe Representative Biskins will yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Well, Representative Biskins, this is a piece of legislation I think that gives the agency the authority to do something it could already do. And I just was wondering if you wanted to comment on the wisdom of adding additional language to our statute books that doesn't particularly accomplish anything that the agency couldn't do today.
Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the minority leader, I plan to oppose this bill, and you're free to do the same.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, and I guess that's the point, and I won't ask the author to yield, but it seems like at this point this bill has come to the point of telling the agency that it can do something that it could already do today, and then puts some restrictions on how that could work a little bit. I just don't see the point of this bill, and it creates, the Department of Administration is going to have to prepare another report. I guess I just don't. There used to be someone, I don't even know who it was before my time, who used to stand up and simply ask the question, why do we need this legislation? And maybe I should just leave it at that. I'm going to be voting no as well with Representative Biskins, and mainly for the reason that this doesn't do anything.
Further discussion on third reading. Seeing none, the clerk will give the bill, call the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 81 yeas and 50 nays, the bill is passed and title agreed to. I'll call on the member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move the calendar of the day be continued.
All in favor of continuing the calendar of the day signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carried. The calendar of the day is continued. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions on the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Hearing no objections, the motions will prevail. Other motions.
Abler moves that House File 1191 be recalled from the Committee on Health and Human Services Reform and re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Finance. Abler.
Is he there? Aaron, you know Abler?
Representative Abler is not currently on the floor. We'll hold on that for a moment. Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And today I do rise under Rule 1.22 to announce my intention to place House File 2294 and House File 2754 on the fiscal calendar for Thursday, March 29th. That's the Abler Health and Human Service Bill and the House Bonding Bill to fund restoration of the state capitol.
Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File number 2455. Gruenhagen, Sanders, and Winkler.
Calling the member from Anoka, Representative Abler, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm sorry I was off the floor. This is the social work licensing bill. It was heard it actually was in the omnibus last year. We might need this vehicle to actually do it in a different way, and so it's going to go to the Finance Committee, and I'd urge your support. Thank you.
All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carried. The announcements. Announcements. Representative Morrow.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, I'd like to announce that Bob Gunther and the rest of the I-90 Coalition are inviting you all over to Kellogg Square at 5:30. And I believe, Representative Gunther, we've got the Martin County pork producers providing some food tonight.
Announcements. Representative Gunther.
Thank you very much. We expect you all to be there. Good Martin County pork chops, potato salad, and food and beverages from southern Minnesota. And the host and hostess will be Representative Morrow and Representative Poppy.
Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The Ways and Means Committee will reconvene at 4:05 in room 200.
Seeing no further announcements, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 1 p.m. Thursday, March 29th, 2012.
Representative Dean moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 1 p.m. Thursday, March 29th, 2012. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? The motion prevails. Representative Dean.
I move the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 1 p.m. Thursday, March 29th, 2012.